GDG Cloud Boston and GDG Atlanta are pleased to present formal session number 6. This is the 12th meeting in a series of 12 meetings that cover the Professional Cloud Database Engineer Certification Workshops. And I'm your host, Norbert Kremer at GDG Cloud Boston. Jessica Roses from GDG Atlanta. We have also a guest presenter this evening, Glen, who presented for one of our sessions back in June. Glen's joining us again for the wrap-up ceremonies this evening. And we may have Uyanga Jung or Melody. She's another organizer at GDG Cloud Boston, also Women Tech Maker Ambassador. She's a data scientist for her day job, and for our GDG group, she does a lot of video editing, and she makes live stream video recordings that some of you may have seen on LinkedIn and elsewhere. She's very good at doing things on the fly, which I'm not as good at. So she may join. I don't see her online yet, but she may join us at some point this evening. So all of our GDG events are covered by Code of Conduct. The spirit of that is very simple. It's just be nice, respectful, constructive, collaborative, participate to the extent that you can, and just be helpful. And we're all here to learn. The official legal wording of that Code of Conduct is at a link here at this website. All of the slides and the YouTube the recording of this session is being recorded. The recording will be posted to YouTube later this week. There'll be a link in that YouTube description to the slides, so you don't have to grab these links in real time. You can just get them off the slide deck later. Okay, a few housekeeping notes. So the way that the sessions are named, this is called formal session number 6. The original intent of the series was that Google gave us presentation slides for 6 meetings, and we call those the formal meetings, and we were going to have those every other week. In between, we have more informal sessions where it's more like office hours, ask us anything, and then I've done a few presentations on some other topics that are not really part of the exam, but they're interesting for database practitioners. So I've enjoyed doing those extra topics, and I think some people have told me that they've learned something from them, so that's great. As I mentioned, as we transition out of the, let me back up a step. So this is not actually today's session, although it's called formal session number 6, it is not going to present any, very little of the Google supplied slide content. It's more of just a wrapping up, and it's meant to be a little bit festive. And we have a swag giveaway, which I hope will be the high point of the meeting. And we're not going to do any heavy diving into database topics this evening. This is more of a chance just to ask any questions you may have, give you a little bit more orientation about how the exam works, if you have questions on that, and then the swag giveaway at the end. So it's meant to be fun today. As we transition off of the series, our Slack channel will remain open, but we're using a free version of Slack. The workspace will be maintained going forward, but the older messages will scroll off, right? Because they're kept only for 90 days. So it will become less useful for the links that were posted there, in June. They'll be gone soon. And so likewise, the links for YouTube and so forth will scroll off eventually. So Jessica's been working on a Google document all along. She's been adding important links, and the YouTubes can always be found if you go into just go into YouTube and search for GDG Cloud Boston. We have our YouTube channel there. There is a playlist for this series that has about 10 videos in it now, and we'll have 12 or 13 videos in there when the playlist is complete. And Jessica will put all these links into the Google Doc. The Google Doc will eventually have a persistent home, not on Slack. Right now, it's just exists as a link in Slack. So we plan to keep all this going for at least a year. I can't promise you what happens more than a year out. I have no idea, right? But at least for a year, we'll keep things going so that you have a reference to look back. Now, likewise, the Skills Boost access that you've all been using as part of the workshop series here, it may expire at the end of August. I believe, I think it's been rolling over month by month and automatically. So as we've transitioned from June to July to August, I think everybody may have gotten an email, as I did, that said, hey, your Skills Boost access has been renewed and it's good for another month. I believe we're not having a meeting in September as part of the series. So I believe that the Skills Boost access will probably expire at the end of August, which is a couple days from now, a few days from now. So what you can do is, I know some of you are still wrapping up some courses here, some of the lab materials are still working on them. That's fine. You can actually use the Skills Boost in any way that you see fit until it expires. You can even do things outside of the database learning path. You can take a look at the Gen AI stuff, or you can look at some of the PCA or PDE tracks, whatever you want to do. You can do it until it expires. After that expires, you're invited to join the Google Cloud Innovators community. This is a new program that was announced over the summer at Google I/O. There is available to everybody that has a Gmail account. You can become a Google Cloud Innovator. That gives you 35 credits per month on Skills Boost for free, no strings attached. How do you get a Gmail account? Well, that's also free, as most of you know, right? So I recommend using the same, if you can, use the same Gmail account that you've used for Skills Boost here. Just transition it over and become part of the Innovator community. That'll get you 35 credits per month on Skills Boost in perpetuity, right? You can just keep doing that. And then if you join another workshop series, you'll get into another credit pool later on. You'll get additional credits through that mechanism. Okay, any questions about that, you can check with us later or check on Slack, post a query on Slack and we'll get back to you about that. So what are we doing this evening? Well, we're celebrating. We're done. We've accomplished a lot. I'll go into how I see the accomplishments. I think it's been a really wonderful, wonderfully productive summer for all of us. And we'll review some of that in a moment. We'll have some exam tips from Google very briefly. Then we'll have a Q&A period, which will also be fairly brief because we don't want to delay the great swag giveaway that is coming. And then at the very end, recordings with the group online. So if any of you feel like turning your cameras on toward the end of the meeting, I'd love to have you do that. Just so you know, we usually do the GDG symbol with our fingers like this is the two V-shaped signs with your fingers represents GDG. We're going to do a number of thank yous for our sponsors. And I can tell you that our sponsors are very appreciative of these videos, even though they're only a few seconds long. We post them in YouTube and we send them to the sponsors. They just love them, and it's just showing gratitude for the books and the Skills Boost access and all the learning materials that Google has provided. And so we're just expressing our gratitude. They in turn are very happy that we do that, and it built our relationship, and it means when we go to ask them next time for additional swag and books and things, they will remember us and they'll be responsive to our requests. So that's all good, right? So we have done a lot. To my knowledge, this is the first cohort ever to complete this learning path. So I think you should all think about that for a minute. We're the first group to ever go through the Cloud Database Engineer learning path. It's been out available for about a year. This is a relatively new certification, relatively new exam, and I was actually waiting for Google to provide the materials for us to run this workshop series. When they did that, I wasn't able to do it immediately when they released those materials, but I was able to start this summer. So we are very pleased that we've gone through this, and that's great. So Google supplied us with through the Skills Boost learning platform. They provide us with 12 hours of on-demand video lessons, which many of you went through, about 65 hours, by my estimate, 65 hours of hands-on labs related to cloud database engineering. That's an awful lot, and covered almost every product, almost every database product within Google Cloud, which is quite a few. Does not include BigQuery. As we've mentioned before, BigQuery is considered to be part of the analytics services within Google Cloud, and therefore it's covered in the data engineer learning path. It is not covered in cloud database engineering per se. Okay, so yeah, we'll leave it there. We've had part of the series, we've had multiple guest speakers, which has been very much enriched our program. Glen is one of those volunteer speakers. He came on as a Google Developer Expert, or a GDE. We had one other GDE present for us. That's Walter Lee. He's not able to join us. I don't think he'll be able to join us this evening. And then I presented about maybe 15 hours, give or take, of original content on a variety of topics, both related to the Google Skills Boost and also some additional topics that I thought were of interest. So quite a lot of material to go through. A lot of learning has taken place over this summer. So I think we can all reflect on that and be proud of our accomplishment. Now, this just shows you, you've seen this every week. It's just a quick review of all the completed courses that we've gone through. Unfortunately, I can't really read it too readily on my screen, but they've chosen a very light blue font there. It's a little hard for me to read. And so we went through a lot of migration. The database engineer path focuses in the early part a lot on migration. How do you move data from on-premises to the cloud to get to Google Cloud? Some of the comments I made earlier in the series are that Google provides you great tools for the technical details of actually moving data, but they're a little bit light on how you actually manage those projects, how you do the QA on the data after it's moved, how do you actually get a migration done if you're in a very active situation where the database is in constant use and it cannot tolerate any downtime. There's a little bit of a gap there that Google doesn't give you all the answers. So you may have to work out, okay, how do we may have to run both systems in parallel for a while, run the on-prem and the cloud system in parallel to make sure that both systems are working well. And then we have to choose our least active part of the work cycle. Maybe that's a weekend or some other slower period. And we try to do our cutover during that time period. So Google doesn't give you too much advice on that. That's where you really need to have develop the expertise in-house. You have to have good project management to wrap around the technical tools that Google provides. So that's the learning in that area. We then moved on to look more in detail at relational database systems in Google Cloud. So MySQL is available as a kind of cloud SQL in the Google Cloud environment. Also, Postgres is available as well. SQL Server is available under Cloud SQL as well as managed services. So we talked about the advantages of managed services as opposed to creating your own database instance on a VM and managing everything else, managing all the patching, security patches, software upgrades, all that stuff. When you use Cloud SQL, a lot of this is taken care of for you, and you can therefore have less reliance on database administrators. I think you always need some DBA knowledge, as you also need some data architecture knowledge within your team to run these systems, but it does lessen the administrative burden. Then we moved on to Cloud Spanner, which is still a relational database, but it is a very interesting one in that it has multiple write nodes across the entire planet, right? So it's a globally available instance. We talked briefly about Brewer's cap theorem and how it's actually a very difficult problem to have a globally consistent and globally available database system. Spanner has seemingly violate the CAP theorem, although it doesn't really, because they've used something called true time as a very precise mechanism for knowing exactly what the time is globally. That relies on the GPS system to coordinate time across the globe. That's how they have achieved the very unique capabilities of Cloud Spanner without violating CAP theorem. So we discussed that briefly. We then moved into Bigtable, and we had in the context of Bigtable versus Cloud Spanner, we had a lengthy discussion about exactly what makes a relational database relational, what makes a so-called NoSQL database NoSQL, and I mentioned that I think the term, in retrospect, we might have been better as a field using the term non-relational data store. That doesn't roll off the tongue as easily as NoSQL. And I think the term NoSQL got started in a blog post and it went viral, and it's caught on, and it's now just part of our language that we have to deal with, even though it's not it's an umbrella term that covers very many systems that are very distinctly different from each other. And so we went through some of the details of how you should think about that, and I would refer you back to either last week or the prior week. If you have any confusion on these points, go back and review the sections on those presentations that are on YouTube, and make sure you have really clear. So the concepts that you need to have clear in your mind are: what is relational? What's a relational database? What is a row store versus a column store? How is a column store different from a column family database? They're very distinctly different. If you have any uncertainty about that, you will have trouble with those questions on the exam. You will, if you are ever interviewing with me for a job, as if I would have one at some point, if I were a hiring manager at some point and I was interviewing people, if you had any confusion about column-oriented or column store versus on one side versus column family database on the other side, if you mix those two things together, as many authors do, many people on the internet do mix those concepts together, if you did that on my job interview, you'd be out the door in the next 2 minutes, right? Because that's just completely fundamentally important concept you need to know. So go back to last week or the week before if you have any doubt. Actually, 2 weeks ago is when I went into it in the greatest depth. So please, please, please get that stuff correct. We finally went on to AlloyDB, which is Google's implementation of a version of Postgres, essentially, that has both. It's a better Postgres than the one that you'd find in Cloud SQL. It's faster. It's more optimized, so it's faster for transactional workloads. It also has the capability of handling analytic workloads by having both a row store. It has a row store for the transactional workload, and it has also a column store built in for the analytic workloads. So it's what we call, as a class of database systems, we call them HTAP, or hybrid transactional analytical processing, HTAP. One of the leading other commercial products in the HTAP space is SAP HANA. HANA uses more of a memory-based approach. I think Google AlloyDB also relies on building its column store, at least partially in memory, but it can also use disk as well, as can HANA as well. So it's a very interesting space. I focused in on the lab number 5 of the AlloyDB course. I think it's the 5th lab out of 6, is the one that I thought was the most important in terms of demonstrating clearly the difference between the row store and the column store. So in other words, you build a row store, you put in some data using PG Bench, and then you get the query performance when it's a row store, and then you also add the column store feature for that table, and then see the performance on an analytic type query. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, because I was working up a demo last week that I wasn't able to complete, and I still haven't completed it, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But interesting story there. So today we're at the very end of this, the part that's in yellow. It's really just checking readiness, taking stock of where we are, getting oriented towards taking the exam, and some final tips from Google on how to do that. So there we go. Okay, I hope we're ready for more, right? So where does this leave us? If this is your first exposure to Google Cloud, you've had at least a solid introduction to Google Cloud itself, right? So as I said way back in the beginning in June, the ideal path, if you were starting from scratch and you had as long as 6 to 9 months or even a year to embark on a longer program, I would recommend that you take the professional cloud architect training first, and maybe the professional data engineer. Take one of those or both before you tackle this learning path, the database engineer. That's because this learning path is a little bit more specialized, and the particularly Pro Cloud Architect is more of an introductory. It's what I would consider the foundation to all the pro level certifications. Now, there are different ways to do it. I know some people are jumping right into the machine learning engineer learning path, for example, or some people have come directly to this learning path, the database engineer. And I think you can do that as well. It's just there will be some gaps in your knowledge. You may have to go back and fill those gaps in on your own, or you may go back later and do the PCA track and sort of fill that gap. That would be what I recommend as ideal. Or if your job is very focused on database engineering, you probably could just do this learning path on its own. But in any case, you've certainly had a great introduction to the way Google Cloud works. We've talked a lot about cloud native architectures, what it means to operate in the cloud versus on premises, the advantages and some of the disadvantages as well. So we've also given you good knowledge of database theory and practice both, right? I've tried to, some of the video lessons from Google discuss theory. They're mostly practice oriented. The labs are obviously practice oriented. I've tried to provide a little bit more context in some areas about the theory in certain areas. So I think we're all in good place to approach the exam with confidence. You should have improved job skills, maybe the ability to take on new roles or prepare for a new role, or be in a, when your next review cycle comes up, maybe you'll be in a better position having this certification completed. You might be in a better position to ask for more responsibility or ask for promotion or any of those things. It's going to help you. We hope that you will continue learning with Google Skills Boost. You've had a great introduction to Skills Boost, how it works. You can continue after the workshop. Access to Skills Boost will expire at the end of this month. You can continue your learning path using the Cloud Innovator program. That gives you 35 credits per month on a perpetual basis. So you can just keep learning. If you join another workshop, you'll get, again, renewed access to new credit pools in the other workshop series. We are, in our local area, we're running machine learning engineer workshop, but that's already about at least a third of the way through. I don't recommend that you join that one halfway through. I think that would be pretty difficult. I think it's difficult as it is, even to do it from the beginning. So I don't know just in general, we're definitely going to run additional workshop series. I don't know when that's going to happen. We probably won't run this one for a while. We may do the data engineer workshops next, but there are no promises based on that because it is quite a fair amount of work, as you can imagine. And I'm trying to coordinate with other people to see who might be able to help do that. But anyway, you're now part of the larger GDG community. You've joined your local GDG, or you're joining us remotely from and just joining in as a remote participant. That's great. So you might be able to think about understanding what your local resources are in terms of GDG community. You could participate in their meetings. You could volunteer, certainly. Whenever there are in-person events, there's always need for volunteers to check people in, just to say hello to people, get the discussion going, or you could possibly end up leading a GDG of your own at some point if that's what you want to do. Excuse me. Here's the exam information from Google. Let's just step through this. I think that this just covers the exam itself. You can take it either in person at an exam center. The exam centers are called Criterion, K-R-Y-T-E-R-I-O-N, Criterion exam centers. For those in the Boston area, there, at least north of Boston, there's one exam center in Malden that I've used myself. It's not a fancy place, but I've never had any problem there with any exam. It's always been straightforward. Come in. As I think Walter pointed out a few weeks back, remember to bring your exam email, your printout with your exam number on it, because the exam centers are dealing with many different people. Everybody's taking a different exam, so they won't know from your name alone. They will not know which exam you're taking. You have to bring your paperwork to the exam center. I think almost everybody on this call that we've asked, I know Jessica and I both feel that the in-person exam center experience is better than than trying to do it at home. It sounds like the at home would be easier. In principle, I think right after COVID, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, the in-person, doing it remotely at home was very attractive. Obviously, we didn't want to get sick, and so that was a very attractive option at the time. I've had myself have trouble with the proctor on one of the remote sessions, and I've heard that many other people have had difficulty with the remote proctoring. So you're certainly welcome to try it. I think most of us are not fans of it because of the, frankly, what it is. There's so many attempts to cheat. So many people try to cheat on exams that the proctors have to be very careful to avoid cheating. And so what can happen, for example, is that literally somebody can sign in with their ID and then slip out of the room, and then their friend comes in and takes the exam for them. And then so that's the kind of thing that they're watching out for. Yeah, Jessica, I love your comment there. Yeah, I do understand why they have to do it, but I find it very awkward. And in fact, for me, the software on one occasion did not work. I tried to work with their help desk for an hour. They couldn't resolve the issue, and I eventually, I just couldn't spend any more time than an hour to debug it. And I just told them, I said, look, I want a refund. They refused to give me a refund, and I just lost my exam fee. So that was my bad experience with it personally. So definitely recommend the exam center if it's at all convenient for you to do that. So the exam itself is about 2 hours long. It is 50, I think sometimes it might be 60, so between 50 and 60 multiple choice or multi-select questions. And then you can register at this link. I don't think I'll jump out to this link. It'll be in the slide deck when you get these slides. You can jump out there. It's easy to find. This will take you If it's your first exam, you'll have to set up an account with Web Assessor, and that will take you then ultimately to the Criterion website where you can choose your closest exam center and go from there. Now, I'll speak to the vouchers in a moment, but if you do not have a voucher, the exam fee is $200. It's the same $200 whether you do it remotely or at an exam center. So it's not there's no financial motivation to do it remotely. Let me go on. We've gone through a lot of the questions already. We've discussed the strategy for what I call dissecting the questions and understanding the structure of the question. So typically what you want to do is, if there are 4 responses and only one is the correct answer, often it'll be like a 2 by 2, there'll be 2 factors, and the answers basically break down into, you can look at it as like a 2 by 2 matrix, right? It's just different combinations of those 2 factors, in other words. And so even if you don't completely understand everything, if you can knock out, if you're sure on one factor and you're unsure on the other one, you're still in a better position for guessing than if you just guess randomly at all 4. So in other words, if you can eliminate half of the choices and then you left with 2 and you have to choose randomly between 2, you still have 50-50 chance instead of 25% chance of getting it right. As with any kind of structured exam like this, take a look through, make sure you know at the beginning how many questions you have. You have 120 minutes. There is some, like when I do it, I'm not a super fast exam taker myself, so I tend to read carefully, and then I spend about the right amount of time, like 90 seconds per question, or 100 seconds per question will be sort of the right amount for me. So I tend to look at them carefully. I try to get it right on the first try. You do have the ability to flag a question for review so that you can, at the very end, if you have extra time at the end, you can come back and cycle through and review things that you are unsure of. I have found I almost never change my answer that I selected the first time because I don't want to second guess myself. And my strategy is to spend enough time on the first pass to do the best I can. The only time that I would change an answer is sometimes when you're going through the exam, you will come across a question that gives you a hint about an earlier question, okay? Or it triggers a memory. It may trigger a memory in your knowledge that you didn't think of when you hit that earlier question, but now when in the context of thinking through the later question, you remember something or discover something that is information that you didn't have earlier in this hour, right? So in that case, probably you would have flagged that one for review. That's one situation where I would actually change an answer. It's like, oh yeah, okay, now that I've gone through all the other questions, I realize that's not correct. But if I'm just like if I've gotten to that point where I'm 50-50 and I'm going, yeah, I did a coin toss last time and I'm going to do a second coin toss this time and change my answer. No, I just never do. I mean, it's a little bit of strategy. Mostly you're going to pass by actually knowing stuff, right? And being able to answer the questions. But there is this, maybe a quarter of the questions you'll be, or a third maybe, you'll be unsure of. And you may then go into these kind of strategic approaches into how to improve your odds of getting the right answer. If you don't answer a question at all, you have no chance of getting any credit for that. So if you leave something blank at the end, if you run out of time and leave something blank at the end, there's no way you can possibly get credit for that. So that's definitely a bad strategy. Pace yourself. You usually, when I'm going to the exam center, you're asked to remove everything from your pockets, your watch. You won't have anything on you at all, not even a pen or a pencil. They will give you a blank sheet of paper and a pencil, in my experience. So you are allowed to write notes on that paper. On that blank paper, you can write notes or make little graphs or doodles or whatever you want to help you. You have to give that paper to them at the end and give the pencil back. And so what you can do, though, is what I do is I mark the time, the elapsed time as I go through, like at question 10, question 20, I'll put the timing on so that I make sure that my pacing is correct. So yeah, that's about, I don't know, does anyone else have any, I think we've talked through a lot of this before, but anybody else have anything to add to the strategy of exam taking? I know Walter covered this a lot as well. Okay, I'll keep going then. There is a link here to the sample questions. I think many of you have seen, these are the official sample questions from Google. They're part of this learning path. So if you go to I believe that's a live link. Let me see. Yes, that's a live link. So when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to click through to that link. Probably most of you have seen this already. Jessica and I have pulled out a few of these questions throughout the series, and we've gone through and stepped through both the strategy and also the answers and the reasoning to get to the right answer. On these questions, the correct answers are provided for you at the end, and also the logic that is used to arrive at the answer is provided for you. So this is a really great learning resource. If you haven't done this already, you definitely want to do this before you attempt the exam. Very helpful. But at the end of the day, it's only 20 some questions, and you've already seen some of them through our series. So there's not a whole lot of new learning here, and there may be some gaps in the coverage on this. So that's the only concern I have with these sample questions, is that it's a limited number of them. But they do provide the answers and the logic for getting to the right answer. So this is my material. I wanted to point out some topics that we did not cover at all during the series that could be on the exam, that might be on the exam. And I think the one gap in the curriculum here is Firestore and Firebase. Now, this is a little bit of a complex topic because there's newer versions and older versions. So the current versions are called Firestore and Firebase. The older services were called Cloud Data Store and Firebase Real-Time Database, okay, which were slightly clunky terms, I think, for the service names. So now the new names are called Cloud Firestore and Firebase. And again, these are, whatever's in green is a link, so you can go look up the documentation on these products. So a little bit confusing also is that Firestore is really a database. It's a document database. So it would fall under the category of a NoSQL database, similar to MongoDB being a document database. And just briefly, a document database has somewhat like a key value database. It has a key, like the row key in Bigtable. It also has a value. The difference in a document database is that you can actually you can parse the components of the value as if it's a document. So it could be a JSON document or it could be an XML document, and you can put indexes on certain fields within the JSON or XML, and then if you establish those secondary indexes, you can do efficient queries on parts of the document that are stored in the document store itself. So those are the features of MongoDB and Cloud Firestore. And just again to remind you, Bigtable is key value, but there are no secondary indexes. There's only an index on the row key. So if you want to do an efficient retrieval in Bigtable or any key value data store, you can only do it based on the row key, and you cannot do an efficient scan on the values, what the content of the values in the value part of the key value store. Okay, so that would be, if you had to do that, you would be doing a full table scan, which is generally not a good idea when you have large data volumes. So I find it a little bit confusing that the database is called Firestore, and then Firebase sounds like database, but no, Firebase is actually something else. Firebase is a much larger set of products. It's called backend as a service. So it actually lets you build web applications that are used in mobile and web applications. And what you think of as Firebase is when you have an application where you could have multiple clients, like you could have like a mobile and a web app at the same time. And if you do an update on your phone, it immediately reflects that in the web application. That's what Firebase is for. And it also has a data store integrated in. So think of Firebase as BAAS, backend as a service. Firestore is the database or document store. There's also, to make it even more complex, sorry about this, the new Firestore, the new Cloud Firestore can run in data store mode for legacy apps. In other words, the new product can be put into mode to make it look like the older product. And that's obviously convenience for migrating to the newer version of this. Now, there's no coverage. I'm not sure why, but Google chose not to cover this at all in this learning path. I think it's a bit of a gap because I think that I do remember one or two questions on this on the exam, but Glenn, you had more recent experience. Do you remember if
I think there was a couple. Yeah, I think there was.
Yeah, I think this is a kind of a miss on the curriculum here in this learning path. So you take a look at this, look at the documentation, so that you at least know the difference between, at a high level, you need to know the difference between the two products. I think anything that would be on the exam would probably be in about the new products rather than the old ones at this point. However, they might ask you a question about running Firestore in data store mode. That's considered part of the new, is running it in the old style for the legacy apps. That would be still part of the new. So I think you might get a question on that as well. So I'm not sure why they haven't covered that in this series, but that's how we understand it. Okay, let me give you, go ahead, please.
One thing, if you're gonna, for a lot of the databases and whatnot, like you can, I mean, I would encourage you to try it out for yourself. The only thing is for data store and Firestore, start a new GCP project when you test it. Reason being, once you set it as Firestore or data store, like there's the data, you mentioned data store, the legacy mode or the native mode, which is Firestore. You cannot change it afterwards, and you cannot delete the database afterwards.
Okay.
You'll have to. That's the one weird thing about this, but yeah, like if
and
you're
that's on a per project basis.
I don't know why, but if you're ever working on a project, and you want to test out Firestore, data store, spin up a new GCP project.
Just make a new
and do
project.
Testing there, because you can't. It's not like like a Cloud SQL instance where you just like spin up a dev instance, do your test there, and like, yeah, that's good. Let's
throw it away,
tear it all down, and then create a new one. It's not. It's gonna be tied to that project. And
that
you can't change modes. So, yeah. So
that actually reminds me, I should have mentioned this earlier, that in addition to the Cloud Innovator program, so Cloud Innovator program gives you 35 Skills Boost credit per month, right? That's just like the Skills Boost that you've been using all throughout this workshops. right? You go into a lab environment, you create some resources, you use them, and then when the lab times out or you're finished and you close the lab, Google just cleans all that up and destroys all those resources that you were using. Now, what Glenn was mentioning was maybe another thing you can do is you can create a trial account within Google. That gives you credit of $300, and you must use that now within 90 days. It used to be 1 year, but the current program is you can get $300 worth of Google credits within the 90 days. You can use that for almost anything you want. I think there might be some quota limits for trial accounts, but you can do a lot of these experimentation on your own. So that's completely separate from Skills Boost, right? So the difference is when you do things in your trial account, they will not be destroyed at the end of any time period, or they will not expire automatically. So then if you are finished using something, you be sure to turn it off, just as you do in a production environment on Google Cloud, right? Whenever you're done using something, turn it off. Otherwise, if you just spin up like if you start a big Kubernetes cluster and you leave it running, your $300 credit will just be burned up in 2 days. And if you're not using it, it will just be, your credit will be gone. And then that will be unfortunate use of your trial. So, okay, so I was in contact with Roman Jacquez, who is our leader at GDG Lawrence, which is another GDG close to us here in Boston. He is a Flutter GDE. He's a Flutter expert. Glenn, you might be also Flutter GDE, right? I forgot what your GDE
No,
is.
I'm Cloud.
Cloud. Okay, you're
Yeah.
Cloud. I didn't want to overlook you if you're a Flutter GDE. But Roman recommend this particular Skills Boost here. Again, that's a live link here, so you could go to that Skills Boost, and it's called Build a Serverless Web App with Firebase. So remember, it's the opposite of what you think it is. So Firestore is the database, Firebase is backend as a service. So this application is more like the bigger picture of building a web app, where if you do an update on one client, it will automatically update to the other with low latency. So that's really great. If you just want to learn more about the document database itself, you could go back to the book that I mentioned earlier, which is called NoSQL Distilled from Sadalaj and Fowler. Really excellent book. It's old. It's a 10-year-old book, but it's still really one of the best ones for getting a clear understanding of what is a document database and how is it different from relational, how is it different from a key value store. And so there may also be on Skills Boost a lab that is specifically focused on the database. I didn't give the link. I didn't look for that link because Roman was kind enough to recommend this one for to cover this area. So we definitely think this could be on the exam. Yeah, okay, great. Glenn's putting some more comments there about the Firestore and Firebase. So I'm going to move on. There are a few topics that we did cover because I was very expansive in my coverage of some topics that I hope some of you found interesting. That, to be fair, I hope they gave you good context for how to use these database products in the cloud. These topics will not be on the exam, though, because for various reasons. Because simply they're not covered by Google, or the very newest features that I've called out in a few cases, they're just too new. The exam doesn't update that often, and it's very unlikely that you'll see questions on these topics in the exam. However, note the little star. We don't control the exam content, so we really have no idea when they don't. It's not like we get an alert when the Google updates the exam. It's like I don't get an email, hey Norbert, we've updated the exam version, you may want to go back and study again or whatever. You don't get that notice, and it just happens when it happens. Other than the formal like retooling of the entire exam, which is when it goes through a new beta period and all that, that's very obviously called out because they will have a period when there's a beta exam that has many more questions. That's different. I don't know, Glenn, maybe you know, do they change the exam questions between, like within before they do the
No,
beta?
there's like a huge pool of questions
So
for,
there's a huge pool of
yeah,
questions,
yeah.
right? You may not get, actually, you almost certainly will not get the same exam. Like two people sitting next to each other taking the same exam will be getting a different exam delivered to them, and that's part of the dynamics of the exam. So they will definitely be, the questions will be in a different sequence, a different order, and you'll get a different group of questions every time you take this exam. So there's definitely, as you said, a large pool that they choose from. Also, then you don't get the feedback. Actually, you do get a feedback now, but there's no specific cutoff point. Like, it's not like, oh, you have to get a 70% in order to pass. It doesn't work that way. It's more dynamic. It may actually be different for different people, as you, like, every instance of the exam could have a different score for pass fail. You do get immediate feedback on whether you did pass or fail. You get that immediately while you're still in the exam center. And they do recently on some exams, but not all, apparently, they give you some feedback now on what areas you did well. Like, they give you a percentage breakdown, like on this area of databases, you did 65%. In this other area, you did better, you did worse. They do give a little bit of feedback now. Traditionally, Google has never given you any feedback whatsoever, just other than pass, fail. That's it. Okay, so of the things that I have covered throughout the last 12 weeks, 11, 12 weeks, I don't think these will be on the exam. There will not be any, there might be Cloud Spanner questions, but there will not be coverage of the GraphDB or GQL, the graph query language features. Those are very new. Those probably will not be on the exam, on the PCDE exam. The SQL interface on Cloud Bigtable, that just came out a couple weeks ago. That's not going to be on the exam. So you'll be using, any question about Bigtable will be in the context of the command line tools or the API calls that you make to Bigtable to load data and retrieve data. Likewise, I don't think any of the GenAI support features that have been coming in to GA this last quarter and this quarter, like the support for LangChain, the support for vector DB, indexing, things like that. I don't think those features are going to be covered on the PCDE exam at this point. I'm sure they will be in the future at some point, but not now. But the exception to that might be that you might possibly get a question about PG vector itself in PostgreSQL, because that actually predates by considerable time the big explosion in GenAI that happened at the end of 2022. PG vector was already something that people were using with I won't say pre-GenAI, but I'll say the pre-Chat GPT explosion that happened at the end of 22. PG vector was already being used for things like Word2Vec and other things like that. So you could possibly get a PG vector question, but it will not probably cover this very latest GenAI stuff that is very currently being pursued by a lot of people. Now, there are a few other topics. I mentioned earlier I was working on an AlloyDB demo. I've paused that. I was going to try to present something on this today. I said, well, I don't want to do that today. It's a little too, I want this to be more of a festive meeting, and so I didn't want to go into a heavy topic. Also, I found that, let me give you the reason why I wanted to do a demo. There is in lab 5 of the 6 AlloyDB labs that are available to you on Skills Boost. Number 5 actually goes through a simple example of building a row store in AlloyDB and then converting it to, or adding a column store to that, and seeing some way that it improves the performance of OLAP queries or analytic queries. Now, what I did find a little unsatisfying about their PG Bench example, it's very simple. It's only one table. It's 50 million rows, which is a modest amount of data. It's not a lot of data, but it's enough to show some effect of the improvement of the column store for analytic queries. But it really is doing a simple query that involves filtering and aggregation on one table is not very challenging for analytic database system or a warehouse system like BigQuery. The real challenges come in when you have joining of large tables to each other. And I don't have time to go into all of that, but this is my area of expertise, and I teach about this at conferences. So I'm very sure that I'm right about this, that the more challenging queries are more complex. They have joins that involve at least 3 tables or more. So that's the kind of demo I was trying to build. I was trying to put 3 tables together with moderately large data volumes, and then I was trying to see, like, okay, when do I get the benefit of the column store? Like, which tables do I have to include in the column storage, and so forth. I'm going to work on that because it's something that I'm interested in doing. It won't be on the exam at this depth, certainly, but to me, it's a topic that is very close to what I work on in my consulting work, and so it's something that I want to explore. I'll probably write it up as a demo and publish it somewhere in the future, but I didn't have it ready for today. And I found a number of challenges in actually generating the synthetic data. I showed you some of the data last week, and it's pretty challenging to build decent quality synthetic data. I was using the Python Faker library, which interestingly has a unique flag. And what happens is, if it starts generating data and then it hits a duplicate, it just crashes. That wasn't the behavior I was expecting, so I thought it was a bit odd. So it has a unique flag, but all it does when it hits a duplicate is that it simply crashes. And so I can go into that. If anybody's curious about that, just contact me either here on our Slack or on LinkedIn. I'm happy to discuss all that at great depth. But anyway, it won't be on the exam for sure. I did run across, just by chance, I'd mentioned the Carnegie Mellon University has a really excellent database program within their computer science graduate school. One of the professors there is Andrew Pavlo, who had worked with Michael Stonebreaker. I've mentioned in earlier sessions, mentioned these authors at great length, so I won't go on about that. But I just noticed yesterday that Andy Pavlo has released, he's just starting a new series in fall 24 called CMU Database Systems, which goes into a lot of the particulars of how particularly analytic systems work. So, okay, that's my 7 o'clock checkpoint there. So we're good on time today. It is not relevant to this material that we cover in PCDE, but it is of extremely high quality and very interesting if you are interested in the analytic databases or data warehousing. I definitely recommend take a look at these 3 sets of videos from Andy Pavlo. It's just extraordinarily generous of them to put all of this online on YouTube and also with the slide decks. And he's a very entertaining and very good speaker as well. So you definitely would. You may not want to do it if your focus is on Cloud SQL and Postgres and things like that. This analytic systems may not be that interesting to you, but definitely there's a lot here that he covers also on the transactional system. So have a look at that. You will not be led astray by anything that he says. There will not be the information is very high quality. Let me just reiterate that. So you won't be wasting your time there at all. So that's it. Sorry, I kind of, in the guise of telling you what will not be on the exam, I snuck in a few little extras there about the topics that I'm interested in. So thank you for indulging me on that. Okay, we have now time for Q&A. We could talk about, I should have updated this slide a little bit. we could talk about any of the courses or any question that anybody has about any of the topics. I don't know that we'll answer them here, but we will at least acknowledge the question and get back to you on those answers. And then if you have any questions about the exam or the logistics or that kind of thing, we're happy to entertain those right now. You could either open up your mic or turn your camera on or put something in the chat. I'm not seeing a lot in the chat right now. I'll give a few more seconds. You can come back. This is not your last chance to ask a question, but I don't see any burning questions coming right up to the forefront. So I'm going to move on to the great swag giveaway. So let's have an overview of what we have. From Google, we got 6 exam vouchers from the criteria. Well, actually, they're criterion if you do them at the exam center. They're actually just exam vouchers that you can use either for remote proctoring or going to the exam center. So we have six exam vouchers. As I mentioned earlier, if you pay for the exam yourself, it's a $200 fee. So this is basically a way for you to get support from Google to take your exam. And this is their way of saying thank you for taking this certification workshop series. So we have 6 of those. Last week we went through, we saw that there might be about 6 or 7 people who want vouchers, and let me continue with the overview and I'll get into the details in a moment. We have, in addition, we have 10 books from O'Reilly, which are called Architecting Data and Machine Learning Platforms. So this is not, this could be a little bit straddling the 2 learning paths. So it could be partly covered in the learning path that we're in, which is Cloud Database Engineer, and it will cover some material also that is in the Data Engineer learning path. So if you are, I know one person contacted me, Teresa, I think, said she was doing both learning paths, and so she opted for this book because of the coverage of both sides of this. This is the closest book of all the O'Reilly catalog. It's the closest to our material. So I selected this one, and they were very kind enough to send us 10 copies of this book, and I have a big box of them sitting here. We will prefer that you, actually we require that you live in the USA. You have a USA mailing address in order to get this particular book, because we are going to mail it out to you. We're willing to do that for anybody in continental USA. I'm sorry, we can't do it for anybody that is outside of USA. However, we do have 6 ebooks from PACT. This is Database Design and Modeling with Google Cloud. This is directly, squarely on the material that's covered in this learning path. So it's a very good match for our learning path here. And PACT has been kind enough to provide 6 ebooks. And these can be sent, this can all be done by email, so we can connect you with an ebook no matter where you are in the world.